All right, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in once again to the Black Box Podcast, BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Today we're going back to 2010, and it was actually on a November morning when Rusty Sneiderman was taking his son to drop him off at daycare, and a silver van had been following behind them. Unbeknownst to Rusty, an individual would emerge from the silver van and fire 6 shots into him, ending his life. And this began sort of the kind of media firestorm of the earlier part of this decade, dealing with the murder of Rusty Sneiderman and connected to two particular individuals: the gunman, Hemi Newman, who was an engineer and high profile executive, and Andrea Sneiderman, the wife of Rusty, who was having an alleged affair with Hemi Newman. This was a case that was broadcast on HLN, and they had a lot of discussions about it. I watched a little bit of the trial, but to be honest, I didn't see what the big deal was about this one at the time. But it's always been one of those things that I've just kind of wanted to know a little bit more. So recently I've been learning more about the case of Andrea Sneiderman because she becomes the center point of it all. Not the gunman, Hemi Newman, not Rusty Sneiderman, her deceased husband, and of course not the children. One of the things about this, even when they aired this on ABC 2020, they blurred out the faces of the children, which is a good thing to do. I mean, in the family photos, even they're just blurred out. I mean, that's a very respectful choice, actually, by a major network, so good news. But the reason why this takes on such a large presence is Andrea Sneiderman was a very weird person. She is kind of one of the people that the police absolutely hate to interrogate. The person who is kind of a little bit narcissistic to the point where they are actually able to argue back toward the police and make demands. And the police are trying to extract information out of a person, right? But somebody like Andrea Sneiderman was very good at kind of just pushing back a little to make the process more difficult. But what do we make of the affair that's going on between Sneiderman and Hemi Newman? What do we make of that? Well, we can say that Andrea Sneiderman and Hemi Newman work together. We can say that he's kind of like a boss at the company, although Hemi Newman was still married. Hemi Newman was writing in his journal, writing emails to Andrea Sneiderman, talking about spending the night with her, asking her to marry him. And this is where it got kind of interesting. Andrea Sneiderman denied the affair completely. She said he had no affair, he was just delusional, these are just his fantasies that he was writing, she told him to stop, and she was saying that he had a mental disorder. And indeed, Hemi Newman did have bipolar disorder. And that sort of added as a further element to the story. Because when Hemi Newman was finally caught, in a rather sloppy manner, mind you, but he was caught and he pled guilty, but it was actually, I guess you'd say, not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect, the insanity defense, because of his bipolar disorder. But the way he got caught was rather pathetic, to be honest. He didn't own the silver van that was trailing behind Rusty Sneiderman. He rented it. I believe it was from an Enterprise rent-a-car. He rented the van, and during the police interrogation, he's telling them, I don't own a van, I don't own a gun. He purchased the gun a month before the murder, and then he tried to sell it right back to the gun owner, or give it back to the, did I say gun owner? More like the person who sold him the gun. He's trying to give it right back to him. So he's like, I don't own a gun. Horrendously silly when it comes to planning a murder. I mean, he used his real name to rent the car from Enterprise. I mean, you want to talk about covering your tracks? Pitiful attempt. And this just goes to show you a consistent theme that we've discussed on this channel. When you have people who are planning murders, they can be of a very high IQ, they can be very successful, they can be very educated, they can be smart. But when they are planning murders, they get really dumb. They get really arrogant. They think that they've thought everything through. They think that they've thought this plan over 100 million times. But not only does it not stand up to the forensics, it doesn't stand up to any sort of basic investigation. If you're going to rent a car from Enterprise, use your real name, and then use that car, the silver van, in the murder. I mean, you got things like surveillance cameras, not to mention just witnesses giving descriptions. It was traced back to him very easily. I mean, there are so many ways that could go wrong. So it's a very, very poorly designed plan. And we just get this countless times. This is just one of the things that you have when you're exploring the forensic shows and just even the true crime podcasts and the true crime shows and specials on 2020 and things like Dateline and 48 Hours. All the time you hear something about this. Now, in case this story is not complicated enough, let's throw in an additional twist. $2 million life insurance policy. Another cliche in the true crime world. $2 million life insurance policy for Rusty Sneiderman. Now this is kind of where the story takes a little bit of a turn, and we're almost entering into a new phenomenal territory. Did Andrea Sneiderman really want to have a life with Hemi Newman? Did she really want to be with him? Or did she orchestrate this whole thing? Was she the manipulator? Was she the person who just encouraged him to murder her husband, Rusty? So she gets Rusty out of her life, she gets Hemi Newman out of her life, and she could collect the $2 million insurance policy. You know, like, we've dealt with this theory in a variety of cases on the channel, where somebody manipulates someone into doing the murder so that they can get the benefit. Because in all seriousness, they didn't commit the murder. They're not going to jail for that long. They're not going to jail for as long as the other person. It's a leading theory in the case of Gypsy Rose Blanchard, that Gypsy Rose Blanchard was the manipulator to Nick Godejohn. It's even in the case of Denali Bramer, the Alaska teen who murdered her best friend thinking some guy would give her $9 million. That guy is encouraging her to murder her best friend. He's doing the manipulation. He was sentenced to 9 years in prison, I believe, and Denali Bramer got 30 years in prison, if I recall correctly. But is that what's going on with the Andrea Sneiderman case? We might be just entering into a new possibility where you have someone like Andrea Sneiderman, who by all accounts is not completely dumb. She did get caught in all this, and she did get convicted of something. So she obviously didn't succeed in all this, but seems like she's had somewhat of an ability to manipulate people. And that could be a very big possibility about what's going on. Then when Andrea Sneiderman would be on the stand during the trial, this is the stuff that I would watch on HLN years ago, they would describe her as the person who would cry, but no tears are coming out. And she would describe herself as a wholesome person. And she would just try to give these paper-thin sort of descriptions of how good she was. She was a nice person. Why was Hemi Newman trying to pursue her? Because she was a nice person. And this is like a very kind of abnormal detail. Andrea Sneiderman denied the affair completely and stood by it through the whole trial, saying, no, I didn't have an affair with him. He's just sending me weird emails. And it's like, I don't personally believe that. I definitely do believe that something was going on, and we have eyewitness accounts of them, like, kind of making romantic-like gestures. She pulls her close to him, they're embracing each other in public. I mean, witnesses have talked about it very clearly, and yes, they were most likely having an affair. But it's one of those things where you're dealing with the concept of proof, evidence, and also testimony. I mean, there definitely is evidence, but maybe there isn't 100% certifiable proof. And I mean, an issue that I have to talk about with this one is I really thought that the attorneys in this case, on both sides, but especially the prosecution, were just very silly. If you ever get a chance to watch any of the sort of material from the Andrea Sneiderman trial, the attorneys in there are just silly. They're very emotional. They're just like being very flamboyant with their gestures. It's kind of once again another pathetic turn in the story. But indeed, Hemi Newman is tried and convicted. His insanity defense does not work. Like saying that he had bipolar disorder, that did not work, and he wasn't found not guilty by mental disease or defect. He was tried and convicted of murder, sentenced to life without parole, which is true. It's a good thing. He murdered a guy for his own selfishness. Life without parole. Andrea Sneiderman was tried. I always forget if it was 12 counts or 16 counts of things like, perjury and the accessory and stuff like that. And she was convicted on 6 of the counts. I do remember that because for each count, she was given 5 years in prison. And some people were wondering why she was only sentenced to 5 years if for 6 counts she was given 5 years for each of them. Well, the judge, and this is very clearly available on YouTube, he said that they will be concurrent. Like, things can be concurrent or consecutive. When I was younger, I didn't get it either. Like, I was always wondering, why did they say she has to serve consecutively? Everyone serves consecutively, right? No, sometimes people can have the sentences for multiple counts concurrently, the way that Andrea Sneiderman did. But of course, she got out on parole. She served like 10 months or something like that because they did count some time served. Once again, she did not really succeed, but she didn't fail as badly as Hemi Newman, the guy who pulled the trigger on Rusty Sneiderman. Money, sex, or power. Those are the reasons why people commit crimes, right? This is all of them in a nutshell. And the more we go over these true crime cases, the more we go over some of these things that are kind of like broadcast on the major networks, it's the same formula all the time. It's almost just like, goodness gracious, what is wrong with people? How do they not see that killing someone for money, sex, or power is a bad idea? Because not only do you get caught, but it's like, it's so easy to get caught. And like, let alone that it's morally wrong, or that just what you think is not such a brilliant master plan. That's what I'm really trying to go at. People like Hemi Newman and Andrea Sneiderman, it's not a brilliant master plan that you have. It's just like probably something that has as many holes in it as Swiss cheese. It's just, there's so many ways that this could go wrong, and the likelihood of murdering your spouse for the insurance policy or to be with your new lover, the likelihood of that happening is just so low if you murder them. What are people thinking? Is it really just that they think that they are so smart that they can't get caught? Perhaps. But then you have the other side of it, that maybe Hemi Newman was just deceived by Andrea Sneiderman, and she is actually like the orchestrator of all this, and she's just kind of coaxing him into it very slowly. And there is something to say about that, because what we said was deception knows no bounds. The same way that kind of like how people commit crimes poorly, that has no relevance to education or intelligence, nor does deception. Anybody can be deceived, no matter how smart they are, no matter if they're an executive or an engineer of some kind, they can be deceived. They can be pulled into something, they can think that this is a good idea when in reality it is not. That can happen at any time. But what a lot of people recognize about Andrea Sneiderman is just that she's not a likable character. She's perhaps that type that thinks that she's just such a brilliant and persuasive personality, just a brilliant and persuasive manipulator, but in reality she fools no one. I think most of the people that were watching her on HLN sort of thought that same thing, that she's not fooling anyone. A lot of people just see that she did something for her own selfishness. She's probably a very shallow and heartless person. Once again, the woman who cries with no tears there. And, she was caught, tried, and convicted of something. They actually chose not to proceed with the murder trial. The day before, I believe, the trial was supposed to start, they decided that they weren't going to pursue the charges. And HLN brought that up very clearly. They were just like, a prosecutor has to only attempt if they know that they can win the case. And they probably just thought that they didn't have that they didn't have sufficient evidence to even pursue it. But that's a real shame, because then we'll never really know exactly all of the details about Andrea Sneiderman and her exact involvement in the death of Rusty Sneiderman. She is somebody who thought that she could outsmart the system, but in reality, she failed. Hemi Newman failed, and for good reason too, because they were the ones who were in the wrong. No matter what you say about Rusty Sneiderman, it's like he probably didn't deserve that. Being shot 6 times, dropping his kid off at daycare. Well, anyway, what do you have to say about the case of Andrea Sneiderman? If you have any comments at all, I would love to hear from you guys. And what do you think about this constant cycle of sort of reoccurring money, sex, and power? People who want greed, people who think they can outsmart the system. Just everybody else has failed at this, but their master plan is better. What do you think about that? I mean, just about the kind of commonalities that we're noticing in all these true crime cases, especially the stuff you see on Forensic Files, or 48 Hours, or Dateline, or 2020. When you see those cases, it's almost always the same mechanism. It's almost always the same formula. And it's just like, what do you think about this? Is it just like people are greedy? Is that all there is to it? Or is it that people are greedy and they think that they're smarter than the average person? Or they've thought over their plan 100 million times and they're like, nope, I'm not going to get caught because I've thought this through. But in reality, they just missed everything. If you have anything to say at all, drop a comment below. I would love to hear from you. And until next time.